της Biennale Σύγχρονης Τέχνης της Θεσσαλονίκης, ένα εξαιρετικά σημαντικό, οριακό, πειραματικό καλλιτέχνη και την έκθεσή του μπορείτε να δείτε στο Πειραματικό Κέντρο Τεχνών στο Λιμάνι. Περισσότερα λόγια όμως για τον καλλιτέχνη και για την σημερινή εκδήλωση που θα σας πει η Ειρήνη και στη συνέχεια θα ακούσουμε τον ίδιο.
Ευχαριστώ. Καλησπέρα και καλώς ήρθατε. Όπως είπε και σειραγώ, η έκθεση Biennale και το Festival Performance ξεκινάνε. Βασικά η Biennale έχει ξεκινήσει από το Σάββατο. Σήμερα ξεκινάει και το Festival Performance με τιμόμενο πρόσωπο τον Stelarc. Το συγκεκριμένο αφιέρωμα περιλαμβάνει μια έκθεση που όντως παρουσιάζεται στο Κρατικό Κέντρο Τεχνών. Μια έκθεση που διατρέχει και τις 4 δεκαετίες της καλλιτεχνικής δραστηριότητας του καλλιτέχνη, του Stelarc. Πρόκειται για έναν καλλιτέχνη που για πολλά χρόνια έχει κρατήσει μια πολύ συγκεκριμένη στάση, μια πολύ συνεπή στάση, μιας και που η θεματική της Biennale είναι η στάση, πάνω στην έρευνα και πάνω στην έννοια του σώματος ως μια κατασκευή προς τροποποίηση, προς επανασχεδιασμό και ειδικότερα προς αναδιαμόρφωση. Ένας καλλιτέχνης που μέσα από τη δουλειά του μιλά για τις απεριόριστες δυνατότητες του σώματος και πώς αυτό θα πρέπει σε κάποια στιγμή να εξελιχθεί, να μπει σε μια διαδικασία μιας νέας πραγματικότητας, αυτής της μετανθρώπινης κατάστασης. Καθώς η τεχνολογία έχει διαμορφώσει ουσιαστικά την ανθρώπινη οντότητα και κατά κάποιο τρόπο μας δείχνει τον δρόμο προς μια τέτοια εξελικτική φάση του ανθρώπινου είδους, ο Stelarc μιλάει για αυτά τα πράγματα. Πέρα από την ομιλία και την έκθεση, το φεστιβάλ πραγματοποιείται τις επόμενες μέρες. Σε αυτό συμμετέχουν διάφοροι καλλιτέχνες από διαφορετικά στοιχεία του κόσμου. Η Νατάσια του Κρατικού είναι αύριο, ο Μάρσελ Σπάρτον θα περάσουν είναι οι δύο εδώ κάπου. Το πρόγραμμα θα το βρείτε στην είσοδο του Μουσείου, αλλά και σε διάφορα σημεία της Biennale. Να μην ξεχάσω, η συγκεκριμένη ομιλία γίνεται σε συνεργασία με τα Δημήτρια. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Δεν θα πω παραπάνω. Νομίζω ότι όλοι έχουν έρθει εδώ και τον Stelarc.
So I have to apologise. My conversational Greek is not good enough to do the presentation. I have to do it in English, so I hope that is not a problem. So in this increasing video and virtual world, the body is trying to assert its materiality. The body here is not a site for the psyche, nor for social inscription. The body is a site that needs to be sculpted. So the body here, and in these projects and performances, the body is not an object of desire, but rather an object that should be redesigned. Sound? Between 1973 and 1975, I made 3 films of the inside of my body. Not for any medical reasons, just simply as an artistic gesture, and in probing the internal spaces of the body, you realise that the body is not only a structure but also a circulatory system. An architecture, a biological architecture that has evolved over a long period of time. So we have to remember that the body is a soft and unstable construct. The body is something that is constantly being redefined, reconfigured by social, cultural and technological happenings. But the body now is traumatized and ontologically troubled. And the only way that we can overcome this is performing in a posture of indifference. And by indifference, I mean performing without expectation. These suspension performances occurred as the body was inserted into different situations within different structures. Here the body is suspended within a tensegrity icosahedron. Everything is held together by the tension of the cables. You cut one cable, the whole structure collapses. The body here was hoisted up, lowered down a lift well. And here the body is counterbalanced by a ring of rocks, one rock for each insertion point. In fact, the body was gently swaying from side to side, setting up random oscillations in the rocks. This performance ended when the telephone rang in the gallery. So the body in its suspension is silent and becomes aware of not only of being inadequate but being profoundly obsolete. So this body is empty and absent from its own agency. The body constantly remains uncertain, ambivalent and anxious. The body here is suspended vertically from a gantry crane, and with the control box the body could hoist itself up, propel itself forwards and backwards. The body could choreograph its movements in the space. Everyone thought it was just going to be an up and down performance, but in fact the body propels itself forward. It was in an abandoned warehouse. There was a crying child and a barking dog in the performance, which added a certain ambience. And when I stopped suddenly, or started suddenly, the body also began swinging. And this was a kind of an unexpected part of the choreography. This performance began when the body lifted off the ground, and the performance ended when the body touches down. These performances occurred often in remote locations. The body is suspended here on an outcrop of rocks at the seaside. This performance was in Japan. When we arrived, there was a group of fishermen on another outcrop of rocks, and they were fishing. During the performance, they continued to fish, and when we left, they were still fishing. This performance was about 1 hour. The only people who saw the performance were my 5 assistants and people who went past in fishing boats. So the suspensions here are expressions in bodily sensation, expressed in bodily action. they are not meant to generate any meaning, and they're not meant to generate any particular interpretation. They're physical actions of sensation. This performance was in New York over East 11th Street. The performance was prepared in a 4th floor room, and when everything was ready, the body rolls out of the window and finishes halfway across the street. I had a good view of the police cars that arrived within about 5 minutes. And in this performance, I was arrested by the police, not for performing in public nudity, not performing some sadomasochistic action, but rather because I was a danger to the public. In other words, had I fallen, I might have caused some injury to someone below. The city suspension, whereas in New York it was 4 stories high, the city suspension in Copenhagen was 60 meters high. The body was hoisted off the ground, rotated around, and then lowered for a performance of about 30 minutes. After 30 meters high, all you could hear was the whooshing of the wind, the whirring of the crane motors, and the creaking of the skin. Having explored the physiological and psychological parameters of the body, there was a desire to augment the body in some way. And the third hand was the first prosthetic attachment to the body. It was controlled by electrodes on the leg and abdominal muscles. So it was possible to have independent movements of the 3 hands. This was completed in 1980, and it was sophisticated enough at the time to get invitations from the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena and the Johnson Space Center in Houston to demonstrate the hand to the extravehicular activity group. Initially, it was really a visual attachment to the body. You know, how would the body perform with an extra hand? And I did a series of performances playing with this idea of a visual attachment. In fact, I had planned to make a 4th hand, but I ran out of money, so it was only ever 1 extra hand. But I did try to do some more useful things. So here I'm writing 1 word, each hand writing a separate letter at the same time. I had to keep my 2 eyes on what my 3 hands were doing. And because this performance was done on a sheet of glass between the artist and the audience, I had to learn to write it back to front. And because of the spacing of the 3 hands, I had to remember which sequence, because I had to remember writing every 3rd letter at the time. A performance with a 3rd hand, but with optic fibre cable directing laser beams to the eyes. By controlling the muscles of the eyes, you could scribble images with your eyes. The eyes become active transmitters of an image, not passive receptors of light. And in this performance, my brain waves, heartbeat, blood flow and muscle signals were amplified. prosthesis because it extends my right arm to primate proportions. But whilst my right arm was extended, my left arm was performing involuntarily using a muscle stimulation system, computer controlled. So for the 4-hour performance, my left arm was performing involuntarily, whilst my right arm was extended and actuated on the right side of my body. We had also constructed a 3D model of the mechanism, so if you're watching this performance online, you could see the 3D model mimicking the movements of the actual mechanism. This was the muscle stimulation control box. The blue switches indicate which muscles can be contracted through the muscle stimulation system. And it didn't take much imagination, but if you could program the body to perform involuntarily in a local space, you could also do it remotely. And we constructed a 3D model of a body by pressing the muscles on the computer model. It was a touchscreen interface. The computer model mimics the movement that you've programmed, and then a second later in Luxembourg, where my body was, the body moves involuntarily. So people in the Pompidou Centre in Paris, the Media Lab in Helsinki, the Doors of Perception Conference in Amsterdam, for example, could remotely access and remotely choreograph the body. It was the experience was voltage in, involuntary movements, voltage out, controlling a third hand. So it was a kind of split body experience. Ping body was not about people in other places controlling the body, but rather internet activity animating the body. So we pinged 40 global sites during the performance. The reverberating pings were measured in milliseconds by the host computer, and then this was mapped to my body. So my body was moving depending on the internet activity. So if you pinged China, this was in 1996, there was not so much internet activity in China, so the body moved only in small movements. But if we pinged the United States, there was much more internet activity, the body moves more animated. Parasite, we customized a search engine, and this search engine scans the internet, selects images on the net, displays them to my head-up device, and the images that I see are analysed. The complexity of that image is mapped to the body, so the body moves by the images that it sees. And in addition, the body has tilt sensors on its limbs. So as the body moves, it also becomes the video switcher and video mixer. So this is a kind of sample of the switching and mixing that resulted from the body's involuntary movements. The search engine finds anatomical images on the net, displays them to me, analyzes them, and animates my body. There is sound. And this sound was also by the search engine sampling sounds from the internet. So the whole system is internet constructed, and this was also streamed live on the web. So what's happening now is that bodies are becoming end effectors for other bodies in other places and for machines elsewhere, generating interactive loops and recursive choreographies. You know, we're no longer merely biological bodies operating in a local space. We're now bodies that can perform remotely, that can interface with people and machines in other places. Yeah, please come in, and you won't see anything in the corner. If you'd like to come inside, maybe in the centre there. Okay. So all of these projects and performances are about alternate anatomical architectures, exploring what it might mean to have an extra hand or an extended arm, or performing with a six-legged walking machine. The ambidextrous arm is a double-jointed arm, a double-jointed hand. I initiated this at Brunel University in London, and imagine if you could bend your fingers one way and your thumb rotates and you have a right hand, but the fingers can bend completely the other way, the thumb can rotate backwards, so you have a design that is left-handed and right-handed all in one. So if you were an amputee and you lost your right hand, why would you replace it with another right hand? You could replace it with an ambidextrous hand. Sometimes performing a task with two left hands might be useful. And here we were just testing the double-jointed finger movements operated by pneumatic rubber muscles. So the body has become this contemporary chimera of meat, metal, and code, of modified biology accelerated by metal with a speed that far exceeds its metabolic, muscular, and sensory capabilities. And, you know, it's a chimera that also is augmented and amplified with computational code. Exoskeleton is a six-legged walking machine, about 3 meters in diameter, about 3 meters in diameter, robust enough to support the artist's body. And this performance is simply taking the robot for a walk. That's what the performance is about. But the body can control the leg movements of the robot by making different arm gestures. So by moving my arms, I can activate the different leg movements. This performance was firstly done in 1997. So the robot could walk forwards with a ripple gait, sideways with a tripod gait. The robot could squat, it could stand, it could turn on the spot. Another walking machine, whereas exoskeleton was 3 meters in diameter, this is 5 meters in diameter. So it was a very, very large walking machine, and the idea here is that you translated human bipedal gait with a six-legged insect-like locomotion, and the way that it was controlled is lifting one leg up, lifted 3 robot legs up, and they swung forwards. So by stepping up and down, you could move the 3 legs and advance the robot. This machine was very difficult to construct. It also had sensors in its chassis, so the machine knew which direction the artist was facing, and the machine walks in that direction. This is only a smaller 2-meter diameter robot, but it's autonomous and interactive. It has a rotating ultrasound sensor on the front, and it detects if someone is in the room. If someone is in the room, the robot stands, selects from its library of possible movements, and performs a choreography for about a minute. It then sits down, goes to sleep, and waits for the next person to come along. It's a very noisy robot. So the idea in this robot was to make it an actual virtual system where the mechanical movements of the legs would modulate the facial expression of the head. This project has not been realised yet. It's difficult to engineer this because of its scale. So this is a small robot with a webcam mounted on its back. It will be small enough to climb up my tongue and into my mouth. I have to remember not to swallow. But it's a kind of aesthetic gesture as to, you know, the future intimacy with our technology. Because as technology becomes micro-miniaturized, as it becomes nano-scaled, technology will be incorporated inside the body. In fact, in 2,000 years, our human bodies might look exactly the same, but they will be populated by micro and nano robots, sensors, detecting pathological conditions in the body. But what might be really interesting is being able to redesign the human body, atoms up, inside out. Because of this hybridized wheels and legs, which they call WEGs. So the architecture of the legs allow the robot to move very fast on a flat surface, but also it enables it to clamber over obstacles, and also because of the springy nature of the legs, the robot can perform rather athletically. So robots now are increasingly more muscular and athletic in their performance in the real world, and we know from projects like this by Boston Dynamics that this dog-like robot with a neck that is actually a manipulator, you know, performs in a very mammalian way, very uncanny, and increasingly now these are the kinds of robots that we'll be interacting with. The more humanoid robots, a 75-kilogram robot called Atlas, and this robot can jump over obstacles and also perform somersaults backwards. So the problem now is not only to develop machine musculature, but also to develop machine cognition augmented with artificial intelligence. And with humanoid robots, this is the robotic head of David Hansen, a roboticist originally from the US, but with 32 micromotors embedded in the flexible skin, the robot is able to generate very lifelike, very seductive human expressions. Why do you want to have human robots? Why not insect and animal robots? Well, of course, we're hardwired to interact with people through their facial expressions, through their speech. And so humanoid robots will become increasingly prevalent. And the two very interesting quotations that I like to refer to is Nietzsche, who says there's no being without doing. In other words, we attribute agency in retrospect. So it's the action that's important. The intention is something that we project onto our machines. And Wittgenstein, who asserts that thinking doesn't have to be located inside your head. Thinking occurs with the lips that you speak, with the hands that you write, or the fingers that you type with. So it's a kind of a Western a convenient assumption that thinking and intelligence is somehow inside your head. It's really something that's expressed interactively. What's important is not what's in my head or your head. What's important is what happens between us in the medium of language within which we communicate, in the medium of and the institutions and culture that we've been conditioned with. And the other thing to remember too is that as we make robots more and more human, people begin to feel that it's more and more creepy interacting with these robots. Now, is this a kind of philosophical barrier to engineering human robots, or is it just simply a technological state-of-the-art problem? I suspect it's the latter, because it's not only about creepy robots. We know there are creepy people in the world as well. You know, if I'm socially inept, if I have a stammer, if I'm a psychopath, if I'm a schizophrenic, I'm pretty creepy as well. So I think the problem is more state-of-the-art. But now we're in this age of circulating flesh, where we can take organs from one body and insert them into another body, where we can take the hands from a dead body and stitch them to the limbs of an amputee. I met the first double hand transplant in a medical conference in Paris, and only after 6 months his cadaver hands could be animated. He had a rudimentary sense of pressure, temperature and texture. So the body that you're born with probably will not be the body that you die with. Also, it's a time of fractal flesh, where bodies and bits of bodies, spatially separated but electronically connected, can generate recursive, interactive choreographies. And phantom flesh. We're increasingly performing with our online avatars, with our online phantoms. And in fact, increasingly now the body experiences itself as its phantom, not as in phantasmagoria, but rather as phantom limb. To others online, the body appears flickering on and off as digital noise, as a glitch in biological time. We can instantly create a skin by scanning anyone's face, and we can animate the skin. In fact, at an audio-visual level, you will not be able to discern whether it's a real person at the other end or an animated skin of that person. And skins now become screens. Skins have this optical and haptic thickness, and it's this thickening that collapses the psychological space between bodies. Skins as screens exhibit seductive vocabularies of aliveness.
Here's Baby X, and this is, she's been learning to read words. So here's her first word in the book. So let's see what she can see. It's into the page. And here we go, let's see what what's this, baby? What's this? What's this? What's this? Good girl. Now see if she knows what the word is. Okay, baby, look over here. Okay, what's this? What's this? Good girl. Let's try her on something else. Okay? Okay, what's this? Baby, over here, what's this? Baby, look at me, what's this? Baby, over here. Good girl. Well, that's what she's just read. For a picture. Okay, baby, what's this? Okay,
So with this high fidelity 3D modelling, the baby was based on Mark's own child. So you have a better 3D modelling. You have adequate morph targets to animate the face. You're using visual and acoustical feedback, and you're literally teaching the baby avatar to learn and to speak. And this is a combination of cognitive sciences, a combination of neurophysiology, and you could see that there is kind of curiosity behaviour and curiosity awareness exhibited by the baby's facial expressions. So the body now increasingly oscillates between its physical form and its online phantom. This oscillation is the quickening coupled with the optical thickening that I mentioned before that fuses the physical and the phantom. So we're not performing always as a physical body. Online we become these phantom bodies, and this oscillation between the physical and the phantom generates a chimera that is constantly performing in mixed realities. In 1993, I designed a sculpture for the inside of my body. The theme of this Triennale was site-specific works. But instead of a sculpture for a public space, I decided to design a sculpture for a private physiological space. The stomach was inflated with air. With the help of an endoscopist, it was inserted about 30 centimetres inside the stomach. Inside the stomach, the sculpture opens and closes, extends and retracts, has a flashing light and a beeping sound. So you have to imagine this as a machine choreography inside a soft body. So here, the body is not a site for the psyche, it's just simply a site for a sculpture. Blender was a performance done with another artist, Nina Sellers, where we both underwent surgical procedures to extract 4.6 litres of our biomaterial. This biomaterial was inserted into an installation titled Blender. This was a kind of inverse of the stomach sculpture. Instead of a machine choreography inside a soft body, here a machine installation becomes the host for a liquid body composed of biomaterial from two artists' bodies. There were sensors on the chassis of the machine, so as you approached Blender, it triggered the blades to mix the biomaterial from the two artists.
Approximately 1 year to ensure that he met the true criteria to be the right patient for this transplant. And sure enough, he did meet this criteria. At that time, we described a procedure which would essentially restore everything which was not functioning and appearing normal on his face, which included portions of the scalp, through the forehead, the upper lower eyelids, the nose, upper lower lips, soft tissues of the chin, down to the level of the neck, and the underlying structures, which included the upper jaw, bones around the eye sockets, the upper teeth, the lower teeth, as well as the anterior portions of the tongue.
Dr. Rodriguez, he suffered a gunshot accident back in 1997. Amazingly, his sight wasn't affected. He still had his vision, but as you say, he can now smell something he probably hasn't been able to do, for 15 years. He's now talking. Tell us about the moment that he was able to do these things.
So the face from the dead body, from the donor body, stitched to the skull of the recipient, becomes a kind of third face, resembling neither. In the partial head project, we scanned my head, we scanned a hominid skull. I did a digital transplant of my head over the hominid skull, which produced this composite image. Data used produced a 3D print, and we grew a layer of living skin over this hominid human skull. This project only lasted for several days before it got contaminated, and we had to fix it in formaldehyde for the rest of the exhibition. But the idea was to have a kind of a living artwork, a living portrait of the artist using living cells. The ear project initially was imaged as an ear on the side of my head. This was not a very good place to have an extra ear. When I consulted surgeons, they reminded me that a lot of the nerve endings of the face come out in this area. So no surgeon would help me construct an ear on the side of my head. I might end up with a paralysed face. But in 2006, after 10 years of trying to find 3 surgeons to assist and getting enough funding, this was done in Los Angeles in the United States, we constructed the ear on my arm, inserted the scaffold into the skin. The scaffold is a porous biomaterial, and once it's inserted under the skin, once the skin is suctioned over the scaffold over a period of 6 months, you have tissue ingrowth and vascularization occurring. In other words, the ear has its own blood supply now. It's a living part of your body. I'll show the ear when we switch off on the lights at the end. But during this second surgery, we inserted a small microphone inside the ear construct, and the idea is not only to construct an ear like a form on my arm, but also to internet enable the ear. So this ear would become an online remote listening device for people in other places. Even though my arm is wrapped in bandage, even though it has a partial plaster cast, even though the surgeon has a face mask, the surgeon speaks to the ear picks up his voice and wirelessly transmits it. This was just a test to see if the project was plausible. I once showed the ear to my 2-year-old niece, and when she looked at my arm, I could see that she recognized it was an ear, because what she wanted to do was to grab my head, turn it, and check that this ear had not slipped off. But again, this idea was to experiment with an alternate anatomical architecture, but one in which you use your own skin, your own cells, and to surgically construct and cell grow a structure on your body. This led to other art projects, a 4-meter long sculpture of the ear on my arm, and the performance where I was just lying on the sculpture. My body was covered in white clay, white slip. It was very cold, my body was very warm. The clay cracks are creating this rather primordial image of a body on a large fragment of a body. But whilst I was lying on this, sculpture, I thought, well, it would be really interesting to suspend the body above the sculpture. So instead of just lying on it, to suspend it above it. There were 16 hooks inserted into the back. The cables were rigged. When everything was ready, the body was hoisted off. When the cable takes the full weight of the body, because the cable is braided, the cable untwists. And as the cable untwists, the body begins to spin. So the spinning is happening because of the cable untwisting. And I thought this performance would last for about 5 minutes, and unfortunately it lasted for 15 minutes. So this performance began when the body was hoisted off the sculpture, and the performance ended when the body was lowered down. In the propel performance, the body is attached to the end of an industrial robot arm. And in this case, the body's trajectory, velocity, and position and orientation could be precisely programmed. This was a performance of only 30 minutes. If you know anything about industrial robots, it's a kind of a dangerous situation. The sound is very important. So after the body went through the performance, the body was replaced by a larger sculpture of the artist's ear, and the same performance occurred, exactly the same performance occurred, but this time with the ear. What's interesting though is that the robot that choreographed the ear is the same robot that carved the ear. This robot effectively was a CNC machine that carved the sculpture. So increasingly now the body becomes coupled with technology, and we're now all extended operational systems. We all have wireless devices, we all have machines that accelerate our bodies, we all use instruments that enhance our vision, and we all use computers that augment our cognitive capabilities. So for me, there was always a ghost in the machine, but not a ghost as a vital force that animates, but rather as a fading attestation of the human. Stickman is a performance where the body is algorithmically actuated by a minimal but full body exoskeleton. This is a 5-hour performance continuously, where the algorithm chooses the different gestures. So the body doesn't know what it will do next. The performance I'm going to show though is a more recent version of the Stickman, where we also engineered a mini Stickman, so the audience could insert their own choreography by bending the limbs of the mini Stickman, pressing play, and this would transfer their choreography into the performance. The sound is also important here. With another Greek artist, a musician, Petros Mouris, and we had sensors on the exoskeleton, so as the exoskeleton moves, it generates signals that makes the sound. One leg is free because I need one leg to balance on. And so, although the performance was largely algorithmically actuated or actuated by the audience, my right leg is free to pivot, to turn my body, which means that I can control the shadow and modulate the video feedback. There are several ideas, I think, that help us understand our relationship with technology and with robotics. Bruno Latour's actor network theory is an interesting one, where all the actors, whether human actors or non-human actors, are treated equally. So they're all components in an interactive system. And the qualities of any of the actors are generated by the relationship in the network. So it's the relationship in the network which generates your capabilities. An object-oriented ontology, which is also a kind of flattened ontology, which does not assert the primacy of the human body and places more emphasis on the object. Now, when we talk about objects, we sometimes talk about them in sort of negative ways. But Graham Harman has a good sort of way of describing what an object is, or should I say isn't. He says that an object cannot be reduced to its component parts, nor can an object be evaluated by its relations or effects. So it's different from actor network theory, but it gives a new sort of sensibility to what an object is and how an object interacts in the world. And also, of course, the Internet of Things. Increasingly now, objects have circuits embedded in them. Objects become increasingly smarter. Objects are online. Objects can communicate not only with other objects, but with other people. So these three ideas, I think, are important to understand. The exoskeleton arm is an arm that fully controls the movements of my right arm, and this was for a performance titled Rewired Remixed. And the original performance, I was in the Perth Institute of Contemporary Art, but for 5 days, 6 hours every day, I could only see with the eyes of someone in London. I could only hear with the ears of someone in New York, but anyone, anywhere, could access my right arm and remote control it. So in other words, it was a way of distributing your body, sharing your vision and your hearing, and also your agency. The performance that I'm going to show, though, was only 4 days, 5 hours every day, and this was a performance done within Europe, so we could do the streaming online.
Zum Schluss noch von Ihren Worten unbedingt eine Lesung.
Ganz fest, ja. 1 zu 1.
I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what I was hearing, what I was seeing, and I didn't know when I was going to be moving. So the body is constantly anxious, ambivalent, uncertain, and always off balance. So in this age of mixed reality, the body performs always beyond the boundaries of its skin and beyond the local space that it inhabits. It's extruded into non-places and task envelopes of virtuality. Extruding its sense of self, the body experiences itself as empty, but it's not an emptiness from any lack. It's an emptiness rather through excess. We know that we can plastinate dead bodies and we can indefinitely preserve them. Now dead bodies need not disintegrate and near dead bodies need not die. We can exhibit them anatomically in ways that we couldn't before. So what's happening here? The dead, the near dead, the brain dead, the partially living, the cryogenically preserved and synthetic life all now share a material and proximal existence. With other living bodies, microbial life, operational machines and executable and viral code. This has not really happened before. Also now we know that we can 3D print with living cells. And already there's been a 3D printed ear. And they're doing some human experiments on attaching this 3D printed ear. But if we do 3D print body parts, if we do stem cell grow organs, we're going to have a situation where there will be an excess of organs awaiting bodies, of organs without bodies. In 2011, the first twin turbine heart was inserted into the chest of a terminally ill patient, but he lived long enough to test for this new heart to be tested. What's interesting about this heart is that it's smaller than previous artificial hearts. It's more robust, more reliable. It will probably outlive you. And the other interesting thing about this is that it can circulate the blood through your body without pulsing. So in the near future, you might rest your head on your loved one's chest. They're warm to the touch. They're breathing, they're sighing, they're speaking. They're certainly alive. They have no heartbeat. Erasing several thousand years of this romantic metaphor of a heart, but also sort of radically interrogating what it means to be human. If humans no longer are humans without heartbeats, if we can, and there's already brain pacemakers inserted to control Parkinson's disease, for example. But if we're going to be messing with our physiological rhythms, we're really redefining the notion of what is human. And I think we should always think of the future as both contingent and contestable. Nothing happens through necessity. Thank you. See it from you can have a closer look later if you like. But it's really a relief of an ear. It's not a fully three-dimensional ear. I did have a surgical procedure done at the end of last year, but it was not successful. And the idea will be to, as I said, internet-enable the ear.